Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Elementary. So this week's episode led to this dude named, his fake name was Kip, but his real name was Dale. Basically, it was a dude that was in a clown outfit that was found murdered. He's basically, these dudes were chasing after a clown. It's basically, this episode is kind of centered around the fact, well, not really centered, but a kind of the opening theme for it. It's like, oh yeah, it kind of corresponds with like the whole thing that was happening in real life about the whole like clowns popping up and scaring the crap out of people. I don't know if that's still going on because I haven't heard anything about that lately. So, I mean, I feel like that's kind of died down. But I mean, for all I know, it might still be a thing. I don't know. Maybe it's happening, but it's just not getting media attention. Nevertheless, it was basically a core concept at the beginning. I was like, okay, so I figured that's what this entire episode was going to be about. Because the moment like the thing happened at the beginning, it's like, oh, the clown runs past the body and stuff like that, and they're like, oh wait, we just saw the guy. Yet the body's here. It's like, what the hell is going on? I was like, okay, they're gonna instinctively think ghost. It's like, oh man, he led you to his body or something like that. I was thinking like, maybe he was trying to psych you out or something. I don't know. I thought that's what kind of was, but then in retrospect, it's kind of like, well, that wouldn't have made much sense because it would have been quickly figured out, especially when Emmy just looked at the body and was like, oh yeah, this clown's been dead for 36 hours. Side note, had to include it. Deborah Jo Rupp. If you don't know who that's freaking kitty, Mrs. Foreman from that '70s show. I couldn't, at first I was like, is that Mrs. Foreman? And I wasn't for sure. And then I saw her name pop. I was like, yeah. I don't know why I got super excited. I haven't seen her in anything for a while. There was like, I forgot what it was. I also know that she popped up in some episodes of Friends too, but it's like, that's what I definitely know her from. She's been in other stuff too, but nevertheless, not important. It's just like, I geeked out a little because I just love that '70s show. Anyway. The point was just the whole case thing ended up, like basically that murder kind of led to us finding out that basically this was all some viral campaign, essentially. That dude Kip, as well as his friend, are basically going around this small town scaring the crap out of people, being creepy with in clown outfits, particularly for a viral campaign for this company to basically they're releasing some movie that is supposed to be promotion for that. So that's what it was all about. Well, it turns out his friend, Dale slash Kip, got murdered because he stumbled across something he wasn't supposed to. Essentially, there was this dude, I think his name Raymond, he's a sciencey dude. He was basically pumping something into the water, and, obviously Belle and, Sherlock came across it, and they smelled it. It's like, oh, this is almost, basically he was poisoning, like, the aqueduct, basically New York's drinking water. He was poisoning it. And it turns out he basically created a super virus, and it's like, oh man, this is some crazy stuff. It's almost like on some terrorist level, but it's like, oh wait, he didn't actually make it a lethal thing. It was non-lethal. At best, it was going to give people diarrhea for a couple of days. That's all it was going to do. It was non-lethal. And it's like, okay, so why would you make a virus non-lethal? At the same time, he also ran away, like, after this was all said and done, mainly because he killed a guy for it. But in the long stretch of things, what ends up being the case is that this was all on purpose too, because it's actually kind of very interesting, like, when you break it all down, like, essentially it's something I didn't even know. I mean, like, I don't know if this show's completely wrong about it. I feel like, it takes place in New York, so they're going to get certain facts about New York, right? For instance, the fact is, apparently New York, its water system doesn't have an actual filter, like, because it has such good precautions, like, I forgot what it's like an ultraviolet type of thing and something else, Clorox, that basically these two act as a well enough defense to kind of destroy anything that would be in the water. It's actually one of the reasons why Sherlock actually moved to New York, because it's like, out of any place in the world, out of any place in America, it has the best water, because it doesn't have the filtering system, it gets to keep a lot of the minerals and stuff that's within the water and gives it its amazing taste. Because he got super upset when he found out Joan bought a filter. He's like, what the hell are you doing? It's like, no, the water is perfectly fine. He's like, I can't blame you though, because you're up here, you're swept up in this whole water hysteria. It's just like, because it's interesting, like, it's like the facts are there. It's like, hey, the water's fine, they blocked it off in time, so no one's going to suffer any ramifications for it. But even then, Joan was super paranoid, which the information ended up leaking. I don't think he ever found out exactly how that information leaked. I'm sure it was the killer he ended up leaking. I mean, not really necessarily a killer, because Raymond's the killer, but the person behind Raymond, that dude, because I was very suspicious of him at the beginning, because it's like, okay, does anyone else think it's suspicious that he's just hammering it away? He's like, yo, it's like, oh, if this was a third world country, it'd be hitting us this hard, this. I'm like, that sounds like some I wouldn't label this, but I'm sure a lot of, certain people will look at it as like, huh, those sound like something you would hear from someone who would do something like that, like a kind of an eco-terrorist type of situation. Like I said, I wouldn't label someone who does that eco-terrorist, but that's kind of the general term associated with someone who does something like that, because it's like, oh, this is for well, for him, it wasn't even like a Mother Earth. It's not like, oh, poisoning the water to make a point. It's like, no, he's poisoning the water to make money. But just like Joan getting all swept up in everything, to me, I thought that was funny, just because it's like she's supposed to be the kind of, she's very rational and stuff like that. But it's like, it's not, her fault, because like everyone feels like that the moment it's spread out. It's like everyone's like, oh my God, the water is poisonous. Oh God, this is crazy. Oh, what does this mean for us? So she had a normal reaction. It's just a human innate reaction. I guess you could almost say like the lizard side of her brain is like, no, no, no. Even though she knows it's non-lethal, it still messed with her head a little bit, because it also points out something like, oh, if they can put something non-lethal in there, it could just as easily have been something that could have poisoned, like, I think the number they were using, like 80 million people. So it's understandable. But I just love her reaction. And then like the moment she's about to head to the precinct, and Sherlock said, oh, you know what? Give me some water from the precinct, because I'm not about to eat none of this foul water here. It's just like, to see Sherlock have such a stance on that as well, it's just so interesting to me. But to find out that basically the person behind all of this was a guy that was constantly bringing it up all the time. Essentially, he used his positioning on all of this because I forgot what his exact positioning was, like what he does in the grand scheme of the government. Like, obviously he's there to kind of he represents the whole water system or something like that. I know I'm stupid, like I don't know exactly what his title is, but basically that was his job. Like, he was the one to be like, oh yeah, this is, yeah, we ran through the systems, we checked the water and stuff like that. That's his main job, dealing with the whole water and stuff like that. But essentially he was buying basically this whole situation. This scare would kind of force everyone to get a filter, a special filter that he basically owns the rights to, essentially that he owns a patent to. Because basically, like, a filtration system would take years to build. Like, a proper good filtration system would take years to build, because Sherlock ended up visiting a guy that, has a filtration company, and it's like, oh yeah, you've been trying to build a filtration system for the longest time. He's like, well, I wouldn't. The reason why is like, I'm actually building my money into such things as like the ultraviolet, one of the two systems in check to keep something like this from happening, that being the Clorox and the ultraviolet. Like, he invested in that because it's like, the water filtration system is fine and dandy, but it's something like that would, even, with the everything permits and stuff like that, with this, basically the government being like, okay, you can build it, like things have gotten to the point a filtration system is absolutely necessary, then even that would take years to develop, and then everything behind it's so complex. So Sherlock ended up, the phrase he used is like, yo, that's a permanent situation, but it would take a permanent cure, but it would take years to build. And then it's like, well, there is a band-aid, a temporary fix to it, and that's the filter. So that's what this was all about. It was legitimate about making money. Granted, Raymond did the killing on his own just because it's like he stumbled across that. Like, it's like he couldn't. It was mainly because he couldn't let someone jeopardize the opportunity that he was being presented. I'm sure, he was going to get a back slice of some of that money that was coming that dude's way. So that was a big reason for him. Side note thing too, there was that whole thing, like, I don't know, like, I don't remember it ever coming up, DHS being like, yeah, because at the very beginning, they're like, oh wait, because even Captain Gregson called him out, oh wait, you got some information and you're not going to share it with us? Like, yeah, for now. So I guess whatever it was came out, like, maybe it was what the bug was and what it does, but it's like, because they never really expressly said, okay, this is what we've been holding back. So I assume it's just because Sherlock and Watson kind of figured out what they were hiding, the whole super bug thing, so maybe that's what it was. So it never came up again. But luckily they were able to get Raymond back from the place that he went to, which had no extradition. But by saying, like, because he had gotten sick, because mostly some of what he was pumping got onto him, so he got sick. So basically they lied. It was like, oh yeah, the dude's infected. Did tell him that the virus wasn't contagious or lethal, but so he got sent back, so he's in trouble too. But it's kind of like, hey, you help us with the whole situation, you're still in trouble, but the whole Raymond thing, what Raymond did, a little worse. So I don't know, just kind of an interesting turn of events. I don't know. Because to me, like, I caught like a little bit of the preview last week, so I was kind of assuming it's like, oh man, this is because I was at the beginning of it, especially like when you see the beginning of the episode, I'm like, oh, this kind of has a creepy feel to it. Is this going to be like a creepy episode? Is this going to be one of those episodes like, oh, this could actually fit to be a Halloween episode? It's like, no, it's like that clown thing was just kind of like the introduction to all this. It was kind of what led to it's one case that led into something else bigger. I mean, really, it was all connected, obviously, because Dale's murder was a cause because of what he saw and witnessed. But that's not all this episode was about. Another side of this episode is basically that ADA, Chantal, and, Belle have been dating. There's kind of an interesting thing that kind of popped up in this episode. I keep forgetting the fact is Joan is very invested in Belle's love life, isn't she? That's something I completely keep forgetting. I was sitting here and I was like, wow, she is asking all these things. I was like, oh, the moment you get back, tell me on that. I was like, wow, that's, but then again, I was like, well, truth be told, they're colleagues. So I was like, I'm sure colleagues talk like that all the time. And, probably, Belle's, one of her good friends. So it makes sense, but it just, I don't know. I think it's because in the back of my mind, like, I've always, obviously shipped Sherlock and Watson. I don't think that will ever happen over the course of the series. Maybe it will. You never know in the type of situation. Cause like, typically across crime dramas, just based on what I've watched, typically people work together long enough, eventually start developing feelings for each other. That doesn't necessarily just mean in law enforcement. I mean, it kind of applies anywhere. You spend enough time with someone, you start developing feelings for them. And so, but especially in their cases, because like, well, they were both single. Things haven't necessarily worked out for them in the relationship department. I mean, Watson's last boyfriend got poisoned, by poison that was meant for her. So, I mean, I'm really thinking about that. Holy crap, she has not dated since. And that was like in season 3, wasn't it? Yeah, man, she hasn't dated since then, has she? Huh. When her boyfriend named Adam, I think that was it, yeah. But I think in the back of my mind, like, even though Sherlock and Watson, I think it could end up that way, but I'm still kind of, I want it, but at the same time, I'm like, I still think in my head, like, I'd, like, in a, like, fantasized notion, I'd like it, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't think it ever happened. There's a part of my brain that was also like, but there are moments that's kind of like, maybe Belle and Watson would be a thing. I think they click, but I don't know. It seems like Belle dates a lot of people. I mean, I get, once again, kind of work environment thing, dates a lot of people in kind of his respective area, because he dated that other lady who turned out to be an IA cop, internal affairs. So now he's dating an ADA. Like I said, it's like, it's best to work with someone, date someone in the same field as yours, because it makes, I don't know, the conversation, you can bond over certain things. I guess it's a little less complicated, like where a situation is like, oh, you don't want to tell them about your day. It's like, oh, I have to deal with this and everything. It's like, they're in that field too, so it's a little, they may be a little more understanding, I guess is one way to look at it. Nevertheless, I'm diving too deeply into that. I do apologize. But I just always thought that was kind of interesting. I also kind of thought about it too, like, just because, me, I constantly bring it up. I love triangles. Story element, like, it's like, I like the concept of them, like, for drama purposes in the story. I just don't like them themselves. It's like, once it comes down to it, it's like, ooh, I like it as a concept. Ooh, that'd be so interesting. It spice up the story in certain aspects of like, ooh, it'd make these relationships interesting. But at the same time, it's like, oh, but I hate it because I hate someone having to choose. But something that came across my mind is like, like, Chantal and Joan talking and stuff like, oh yeah, I'm here, I know you told Belle to drop it, but I'm here on Marcus's behalf and stuff like that. And it's like, part of me was like, will that turn into something complicated later on, where it's kind of like, oh yeah, you talk to Joan about everything, don't you, Marcus? You don't talk to me about everything. I mean, it hasn't come up, but just like, what if that ends up turning out to be the thing of like, oh man, you talk to her about everything, and then you end up making things complicated. Literally something that was passing through my mind when they were talking. But nevertheless, basically they had a date, and Chantal kind of had to bail because of the case that she's working on at the time, obviously. And then just the whole, I don't know why I do it like that. Just skimming around. The whole situation with her ex-husband, Roy. Like, the moment that bar fight happened, I was like, okay, why is this dude being such a dick? It's like, Belle knocked your beer out your hand, and at the same time I was also like, that seemed like it was on purpose, and I was like, never mind, I'm gonna look past that. But I was like, oh, you're being such a dick, especially like you're trying to fight stuff. It's like, nah, Belle's willing to pay for it, and to get this guy getting so aggro, I'm like, what the hell is your damn problem? You start, and then I was like, oh my god, it clicked in my head. I was like, you're her ex-husband, isn't? Lo and behold, her ex-husband, hubby Roy. I'm not thinking like, is this some kind of power play or something like that? Like he was I was thinking, oh, you're stalking Belle just to mess with him or something like that, try and get him in some kind of trouble, as payback for dating your ex-wife. Turns out that's not even the case. I'm sure that probably played a little bit into it, but mainly it's because he works for the defense on the case that Chantal is working. Essentially, it's this lady who ended up killing her husband. She make like a crap ton of money for it. That basically even her own parents think she was guilty about the whole situation, or that she's lying about things. But essentially what the defense was trying to do was discredit Chantal a little bit by basically making Roy show up and explaining the whole Belle situation, make him fly off the handle and be like, no, man, this happened, blah, blah, blah. And basically by her boss being there, it's like, oh, Chantal, maybe I shouldn't have given you this case. You're distracted, blah, 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 blah. Essentially the point was to kind of get her kicked off the case. As a lady and the defendant being a lady, it wouldn't have been seen as a big issue. It's like, oh, another woman grilling another woman, but then kind of playing with people's minds and their sympathy, make it like, oh, the person who would take Chantal's place would be a guy. So in the defense's, advantage, it'd make it look like, oh, you have this big, you have a menacing male ADA, beating down, like, full charging at a frail woman. Is kind of like the image they wanted to depict. I mean, that's just kind of how law works. It's supposed to be these little things. I mean, if anything, the show Bull has kind of taught you like the little things that can help in your favor when it comes to court and stuff like that. So that's what that was all about. Like I said, get the feeling that there's a little bit about like, Chantal and Belle was there, but nevertheless, Joan kind of figured it out. Apparently, the reason why he's no longer a cop, which he is a cop. So once again, kind of bringing that whole thing back around it, like, you kind of date in those type of circles. He basically left the force because of a situation where he basically took disability for like, he got his pension because of something wrong with his shoulder or something like that. But then Belle showed him footage. It was something that Joan kind of pointed out. It's like, yo, apparently you're hurt and everything, right? But it's like, yo, you were able to push that bouncer who's like super big away from you like it was nothing. Like, oh, you're not all painful and stuff like that. He's like, and Belle's like, okay, so basically, and then, yeah, I can't prove that you are, faking it, but what I can do is it's enough to open up another investigation. If you're found guilty, you'd have to give back all your pension, plus you'd have to put in your 20 years. So, and everyone will look at you. I mean, it didn't come up, but it's like everyone will look at you as a disgrace, like, oh, you faked it to get money. You should be ashamed of yourself type of, basically shame them type of situation. It's like, so I won't tell anyone for two things. One, you quit working in the defense and trying to screw over Chantal. That's not cool. Two, stay the hell away from Chantal. Don't come near her again. Stay away from her forever. And then you had him almost like smirking, like, oh, really? Tough guy, looking at Marcus like that. But Marcus didn't. Back now, Marcus just looked at him and just walked away. To me, moment that happened, my brain, it's not over. That's definitely a storyline we're going to see come back in some shape or form. I think at this point in time, it's going to be a situation where it's like, it's going to be about Chantal, but it's also going to be about Belle. It's going to be about getting him back. Maybe he's going to set Belle up, get beat up and whatever, and kind of blame Belle for it. But like, oh yeah, Belle did this to me. He's going to get kicked off the force and stuff like that. Trying to start some stuff just to screw Belle over as well as Chantal just because of that. So I don't know. That's one direction that can take. But I do highly believe he's going to be coming back for revenge in some shape or form. Don't know what yet. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. If it does come back up, maybe it won't. It might even be one of those things where it's like, oh yeah, it might not pop up this season, but it'll pop up in the future season. I really don't like it when shows do that because I have the tendency, it's a constant problem I have. I don't go back and rewatch older seasons when I have the chance because once a season is passed, because usually it's a couple months between seasons for most things. So I tend to, because I watch so much other stuff, I tend to forget things. So, I mean, luckily for me, shows like this, they have the little thing previously on Elementary, so they kind of refresh my memory a little bit. Not always, but on occasion they do. So that kind of works out in my favor. Side note, there is no episode next week. Maybe there'll be one the week after next or whatever the case may be. So we'll just kind of have to wait and see. But do note there won't be one next week. So, but really, that's all I'm going to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.